Uh, Thank you very much, Atmas. It's a pleasure to be here as always. Scorch, it's nice to be back on the desk with you. It's been some time.
It has definitely been quite some time since we've been casting together here. I'm very excited to get into another edition of a seasonal cup here.
Yeah, I've been out of the loop for a little while with Faria. I've been checking up on the great resource on the hub, which is Mino Caro's tier list, which was updated about a week ago. So I've been checking out what decks are roaming the Faria landscape. So maybe we'll see some of those tier one decks from Mino's list. Maybe we'll see something new.
Yeah, it's still quite interesting to see what players will bring. There are some very spicy ones that have been popping up recently on ladder, as well as some of the team events that myself and ChiefBromden have been running. So I'm definitely interested to see what players bring out, if they'll bring some more standard stuff, or if we'll get to see some of those more interesting lineups.
And speaking of the Chief, he's going to be kicking things off here in game number one on the left side. And we have N3R0N on the player two side. So N3R0N is someone I started to play against a lot a few weeks ago. And he was doing very well. Like I've noticed his name cropping up a lot, and this is a deck that I saw pick up in popularity about a month ago, and that is the Rakoan Tempo deck or Rakoan Control, whatever you want to do with the Rakoans. And it's been banned straight away. ChiefBromden doesn't want to deal with it.
Yeah, no hesitation coming out by ChiefBromden there, and definitely can see why. As you said, it's a deck that has just grown and grown in popularity. It's a deck that just does so many things so well. It floods the board early to ensure that you have extra economy. It has really good trading with the Cannoneer, extra damage, and the transformation into the Doomdrake from the Illusionist. And then, of course, you get the big threats in the mid and late game with your champions. So it's very interesting in the way that it plays out, and no surprise to see it banned out.
And it gets access to that premium soft removal in the Crystal Flower. That card is very powerful, and Rakoans is pretty much one of the only archetypes that gets kind of consistent access to that tool thanks to its land spread due to the nature of the tribe itself. But it's looking like two yellow decks coming from Chief and a red deck. What's kicking about in the yellow department these days? I did see Haunted Husk kind of kicking a storm back a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, Husk has been a big addition to the meta once it was changed to the end of your turn versus the start. Being able to proc it essentially whenever you choose to has really brought this card to the forefront in a lot of different archetypes. ChiefBromden running the two yellows there. We could see something like Flyers that's still been played here and there, or just a yellow tempo with the Husk in there for your extra little bit of burn damage, a little bit of healing if you're getting some of the early Shaitan Demons down onto the board. And that tempo really just snowballs out of control.
We do see the ban coming from N3R0N as well. It's going to be the Rakoans. So both Rakoan decks have been banned. We have a red green deck coming up from N3R0N first. Not sure what Chief's going to go with, but it does look like N3R0N's lineup is a bit more varied. We see a green red, we see a blue green, and a mono yellow. Whereas ChiefBromden's gone for like Rakoan's red deck plus two yellow decks.
Yeah, definitely looks like ChiefBromden is looking at targeting something specifically with that type of a lineup. Whereas, like you said, N3R0N has the more well-rounded. You're looking at, potentially counter matchups. You're looking at maybe just here's what I think is the strongest right now. Whereas ChiefBromden will be looking at if he loses with one deck, with that yellow, for example, he'll have kind of a backup of it into what he thinks is a good matchup.
And it looks like some form of kind of red combat, so potentially mid-range, could be controlled depending on how you build it. Whereas N3R0N's gone for the kind of green-blue. This could be a ramp deck, but looking at the Battletoads and stuff, this could just potentially be a jump variant. So we could see, big jumpers coming down with that Elderwood Embrace, and there could be a problem for Chief to deal with being a red deck.
Right, that extra mobility that's going to be on all of these cards from N3R0N, whether it's the Battletoads, if he's running like something like the Triton Warrior, even giving Shifting Octopus the 3/5 and jump when you have things like the Elderwood Embrace in hand to give it extra buffs. That extra mobility just means he can get onto ChiefBromden's creatures much quicker and take better trades on his own terms.
And we see the Battletoads coming down. Just a solid turn to play here. Got two little 2/2s down. Now, they are vulnerable to a lot of kind of spot removal from red, but I don't think Neron minds that much. You know, spend that removal on my 2/2s, and then when you drop down an Octopus and give an Elderwood Embrace, it'll become a big problem to deal.
Right, and now we see Neron has to kind of go for that little bit of a more defensive play here. Doesn't want to give away the free trade with the Battletoads. Like you said, he has the ability next turn, if ChiefBromden moves up the board, he's going to be able to make another forest and have that Elderwood Embrace to take the beneficial trade there.
I was a little afraid that Neron would go for a 3/5 there with jump just to get that mobility, but I really like the 3/7 because the more life your creatures have against red, the more likely they're going to stick to the board and cause problems. So now as a 3/7, it can go up to a 5/11. That is a lot of life for a red player to deal with.
Right. Historically, the kind of counter to red has been something in green, something with big stats. So taking the extra life here just ensures that his creature survives this turn and then can survive long enough to just keep pumping buffs into it. Sometimes you only need one creature, and those buffs just propel that creature through everything that red wants to do.
And no hard removal, so you just have to throw damage at these high life creatures. And the one advantage Neron has in this matchup, the slower Chief has to play because of these high life creatures, the better it is for Neron because his removal starts to pick up into the late game. You know, frog tossers, 2-for-1 in. It becomes a bit of an issue for red. So we see the backpedal here from this Herald, and now we're just seeing the creatures come down, all these high life creatures. It's going to be an issue.
Right, and that backstep there by ChiefBromden ends up kind of awkward now because it doesn't set up a good Horsemaster line. If he had gone for maybe a mountain behind the Herald and stepped it back that way instead of stepping across, he actually maybe could have had a Horsemaster play here and tried to take a beneficial trade. You know, Neuron's just stacked all those stats up in front, so that still doesn't work. But in this situation, ChiefBromden is Ground Shaker pass, and that looks like it's just going to get very easily traded away.
It's the fear of this 2/2. I think like a flame burst on the 2/2 and then, you know, like step for that horse master, like you said, could have been really nice. But the 2/2, while it has that jump, has the threat of those Elderwoods coming down or those Runan's guidance. You know, it could swing the match heavily into Neron's favor. And I think Chief is playing cautious here because he doesn't want to get overwhelmed by those power-ups.
Right. Again, it's having that mobility, and ChiefBromden seeing it at this point, going for a draw here just because he doesn't really have better answers. Sometimes this is a type of matchup where you can actually swarm the board more as the red player. If you can get your Herald of War into maybe an Underground Brigand, even get an Axe Grinder down and be able to take trades, you can kind of stabilize around the side here. But ChiefBromden right
Wow.
now, just nothing he can do.
I liked Central Ground Shake because it opens up that line with the Horsemaster on the following turn, so you can at least get something going. And here you go, Alduin Embrace doubling it up. Doesn't care here. Gonna spread the power as well, make it more difficult for stuff like Garadan to have a big impact. Combo maybe a Flame Burst with it, just to clear a creature on board. And it is looking bleak for Chief.
Yeah, definitely that would be in the back of your mind. When ChiefBromden in that position as the red player draws and then doesn't play anything, being the opposing player, you have to think that Garridan is in hand. Your opponent's looking for, exactly as you mentioned, the Garridan Flameburst, Garridan Cypher's Wrath, essentially Garridan and something else to combo into multiple removal. Now, we of course see that ChiefBromden didn't have it, but Neron going for that extra buff just ensures that his creatures were going to survive.
We're in an issue now where Neuron is at the point where Frog Tosser is available next turn, and that power up on the Herald going to the Brigand is going to be a little unfortunate. Luckily for Chief, he does have the Ground Shaker follow up, so if there's no power up on the Frog Tosser, he will be able to take care of that 4/1. But it's just very difficult, especially if Neuron keeps picking up power ups or any creature that can present a high life total.
Now we see ChiefBromden still hold that Ground Shaker, wants to get more value out of it than just throw it down onto the board as a single creature. Still with a decent Faria pool here, ChiefBromden might be in a position where he eventually looks for something like double Ground Shaker. If Neron commits that other Battletoads that's in hand to the board, ChiefBromden is just looking to get the most value that he can out of all of his cards because he's behind on board enough that he needs that value from hand.
I'd be interested to see if Neron actually holds on to the Frog Tosser here, and maybe just takes the clears with the two creatures he has on board right now. So just using that life total. But then again, he may be cautious of that Garrodan we were talking about. We have a lot of Fairy on Chief's side, so Garrodan removal combo could be something to think about, especially with that Brigand dying. So it's interesting. Like, I'm not sure. I would just play Frog Tosser here. I would just take the advantage and say, what's up, Chief? Can you deal with this? But we might see more caution coming from Neron.
Right. The big thing here is if you play the Frog Tosser, you're going to lose Frog Tosser and the Battletoad to Garroden. But if you take the trades with your creatures, you lose the creatures rather than so this setup by Neron, exactly what I mean, right? So if ChiefBromden had Garroden here, it clears now 4 creatures. Now Laya still survives, but oh, what a phenomenal draw.
That is a crazy card I did not expect to see coming off the top there. That actually changes the game a lot now because he can clear all that momentum that Neuron has developed. Could even just put down a ground shaker and then just run that into the layer later on. But I still think Neuron's in a decent position just because that double collection on the right is still going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of the going forward, ChiefBromden has the resources to play some cards out of his hand, but then if he's not collecting afterwards, whatever the follow-up trades are, Neron still ends up with the advantage. As you said, is double collecting, has cards in hand to refill the board. But this is a very big swing. This is clearing those 4 creatures, like I mentioned, does leave Leia alive, which is automatically going to clear whatever ChiefBromden plays, but it is the potential that the swing is now available for ChiefBromden.
Yep, Horsemaster on the next turn. Run into the lay. Will lose the ground shaker in the exchange there, thanks to the death touch. It will cost a flame burst on top of that, so it might be a +1 from Chief here just to make sure he has the resources going into the next turn to deal with the layer. But the issue is double collection comes back down. We've just seen the Firestorm. Battletoads, very good spot here to just rebuild the board and make sure that Fury collection happens on the follow-up.
Right, Neron still is in the advantage in that way. ChiefBromden, every single turn, is probably going to be attempting to clear whatever is played, and that means that the reset is Neron first advantage, put another creature onto the board. Then ChiefBromden's turn to try to clear that away. Neron then resets again. So in this situation, it is really just kind of slowly losing advantages, but it's still pretty close for both players. This is by no means just over at this stage.
I wonder if there is a line here where you just go to the left-hand side with the ground shaker, just develop some lands and put them as a collector on that bottom well, and then wait for the bomb slinger flame burst combo on the layer. And then potentially the bomb slinger trades with the water elemental. You keep that collector on the bottom left, so you're gaining resource. You're not always fighting for Feria. Or do you just go for the Horsemaster here and just say, I'm just have to deal with this now?
The big thing here is if ChiefBromden wanted to, he can kind of do both of those. If you go double neutrals off to the left and Horsemaster so that the Ground Shaker gets collection this turn, the Horsemaster could potentially represent 3 damage into Leia and then Bomb Slinger onto that. ChiefBromden can kind of get away with setting up both of those goals in the same play. You just use the Horsemaster suboptimally because you almost always want to use it to take a beneficial trade.
I really like that line actually. Just be pushing that ground shaker into a safer position, making sure it does gain that Feria. He's going to go for the slower line. Now we have seen a Chief play a lot defense during this set. So he's very consistent with his game plan. He's willing to take the long game here and just try and grind out his opponent. But that humbling visions, nice and tasty double collection coming down.
Yeah, the benefit of why we see Humbling Vision a lot more than other removal, such as Frogify coming out from blue lately. Humbling Vision, when it's a 1 health creature, just kills that creature right off. So really well done by Neuron there to just get a value trade into the Bomb Slinger.
And this little frog here down on the left-hand side is very dangerous for this ground shaker. We see the Frogify in hand. I would love to see a preemptive flame burst on this frog to play around Aurora, to play around Frogify. There's plenty of things here that this little frog can do. And unfortunately, I think this ground shaker is going to bite the.
Even in this situation, Neron's far enough ahead in economy. If he had to use the frog tosser that he just picked up, it would actually still be a worthwhile trade with the 2/2 toad and the frog tosser. It kills off ChiefBromden's only creature, as well as setting up a 2/2 down in that bottom left corner, which would represent killing off whatever's played next. So, of course, the Frogify in hand, that's going to probably be the likely option. But if it was a kind of situation where Neron had to use the frog tosser, I think he would still be perfectly fine with it there.
Yeah, I agree. Like Frog Tosser there, develop the board pressure on the bottom left, and then have that Frogify later for the next big threat that comes down. And I think that comes down to just Chief not flame bursting that frog. I felt that position was so dangerous because of Aurora, Frogify. Could have seen Humbling Visions plus Ruden's Guidance. There was so many combinations that Green Blue had access to. It was a dangerous position, and the Ground Shaker has died now, and he's lost that economy.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if it is the playing because of what you've already seen. Your opponent had just used a humbling vision. There was two early Elderwood embraces and a frog tosser used. So maybe you think your opponent doesn't have that removal in hand because they've just used it, or they don't have a buff because they used them earlier. But like you said, there is just so many options available to this deck. And now we see again ChiefBromden, similar to the very first few turns, just +1 setting up for Garrett Flame Burst on the upcoming turn.
Yeah, and not much for Neuron to do here. Just kind of just sit there, collect a bit of area. I think just 2 damage to the ore pass, set up for try collection next turn by jumping to the left hand side. Easy peasy.
Yeah, and Neuron should read into the way that Chief Ron is playing. Again, when I mentioned it earlier of expecting that Garrett was going to be the play here, the problem at this stage is Neuron doesn't really have something else he can do without just losing that play to Garridan. So not even going to develop anything else here because he knows what's coming.
And Garadan is it's pretty tricky here. It looks great, Garadan. You set up that double collector on the left hand side, but we can see that Neuron has access to the Humbling Vision Frog Tosser. That just clears Garadan and sets up that collector that we were talking about earlier. And now Aurora ripped off the top here. This little frog gets the collect area, develop into a 6/6, and then punch that boss off the board.
Yeah, and I would definitely call a greedy play coming out from Chief Bromden. Wanted to play this kind of as a bluff that he doesn't have Garridan because he went for playing the underground boss, hoping that the combat from the boss will then give him enough area next turn to play Garridan again, and Neron will commit more resources to the board. And it looks like he is actually going to get that.
This is interesting because the Frog Tosser actually opens up this Garadan, so maybe the bluff is going to pay off here. That's a tasty Garadan. That's going to deal with a lot of pressure. Oh, he plays the Aurora preemptively here. Push that 6 damage, put that pressure on. So Garadan, even in this position, isn't in a good spot.
Yeah, exactly. Does get a little rewarded on Chief Bromden's side. He's going to be able to clear the extra frog tosser and the frog here. But Garridan coming down, the 6/6 frog already set up means Neron will continue to just clear Garridan if he wants with the 6/6, or just continue to push damage. It really just depends on what he wants to go for.
We're in that position now for Neron where he doesn't really need to play aggressive. You can just clear the Garadan, stop that double collection on the left-hand side, and then just drop a 5/5 Octopus if he really wants to, and then see what Chief does next, react to that, play another threat down. There's so much area being generated by this layer over the game that it's kind of run away now. I feel this match is going to be very difficult for Chief to come back in.
Right, and this is a brilliant positioning play by Neron as well. Could have played the Octopus directly beside the Orb as the 5/5. You're going to get the damage either way. But in this situation, Neron has set this Octopus up for if Chief Bromden plays something on the left side, he can clear it or go for the Orb. So really nicely played there.
And the Bomb Slinger finally takes care of Leia. She didn't really have uh, the game plan that you usually have the card, using the Death Touch to deal with threats. She just sat there double collecting, but it put Neron so far ahead now he can just go for another creature. He doesn't really need to use the Humbling Visions to kill the 4/4. Set up lethal with these bulky octopuses and force Bromden into that reactive gameplay.
Right. Leia there was basically the threat of the Death Touch, did more than the actual Death Touch itself. Just allowed Neron to control the right side of the board the entire game. ChiefBromden just could never play any creature back into that side because as soon as he did, Neron had everything he needed available there to go and clear it off. And again, we saw the power of having jump in that matchup. ChiefBromden never able to find a really good Horsemaster line to take trades back for himself. And yeah, Neron just control the board out from there.
Thinking about the ban phase again, it might be worth banning the green blue deck for Chief, because I feel that red probably can deal with Rakoans. There are a lot of small Rakoans in that deck that Flameburst, Cypher's Draft, Groundshaker all has a good time with. But green blue, especially if you're red in your lineup, that is such a difficult matchup if you don't take that early momentum. And straight away he was pushed out of it. So interesting if the bans would have made a difference here. But we're going to game number 2, green blue returning for Neron, but we have what looks like good old Yellow Rush.
Yeah, it looks like the kind of over sky Yellow Rush that we saw very recently after the Deranged Monkey was released. Now, of course, it was nerfed, I think, by 1 life, but in this situation, you're able to get down this early aggressive 4/5 creature that, because your opponent has not collected, because you're not looking at collecting, is actually really difficult to deal with early on.
And look at that, turn 2 going face already. What are we going to see here? Probably just some Battletoads come down. No, he has to go for the forest here because the lake is being covered by the salmon, so it's very difficult to get a creature down this turn. He's going to have to wait for this octopus going for another land next.
Yeah, and that was a mistake coming out from Neron. Very well could have been because he created a forest instead of the lake, but like you said, the 1 was blocked. It again is blocked here, and these demonic salmons getting very big very early. If Neron goes for the 3/5 taunt just to reduce damage, he has to commit the buff as well. And if ChiefBromden had any removal, this game would essentially just be over at this stage.
Fortunately for Neron, there is no last nightmare in sight. We do see a soul drain. We're probably just going to see a monkey come down, just put some pressure down. This 5/9 does look quite good for defense, but the thing with Yellow Rush, they have expendable creatures, so he's just going to throw creatures at it over time and then start developing that Zealous Crusader into a state that could be harder to manage. But Neron has Frogify and Humbling Visions. He can deal with the Crusaders later on.
Right. At this stage, Neron is damage control, limit what can be done to the orb for now, stabilize the board, and then once those bigger threats come down, like you said, he has the removal, he's going to have buffs. If he can get to the stage of being able to play Frog Tosser, he can gain value back that way. In this situation, it's potentially Water Elemental. Can he get Water Elemental and Battletoads this turn? I think it exposes him too much because he'd have to move the Octopus.
Maybe you don't mind that much because you have the Frogfire in hand. Okay, I'll take a bit more damage. I'll get that Fairy. I'll put more things on board at the expense of my life. But I have the Frogify the Zealous Crusader later. But like I said, it's a little risky. I'm not sure. Oh, I like this. So using the Water Elemental to block the path of this Air Elemental, it was making its way up to the Octopus, but now it's going to...
Yeah, and this kind of achieves the same thing as well, attempting to just limit that damage that your orb can take. Neron did have the Soul Drain in hand, but otherwise would have had to use both of the salmons here, so...
Okay, takes a draw. Gonna take another punch there to the orb with the follower. But now we see Frog Tosser come down. This is the moment for Neron. He gets to swing the board back into his favor, gets to clear a creature, develop 2 creatures on board, and then we'll have to see what happens, because I feel that the Frog Tosser could just be the nail in the coffin following that Frogify, but it depends on what Chief gets up to.
Ooh, and actually takes the value trade onto the follower instead of killing the salmon here. That's interesting because otherwise Neron would have had a 4/1 and the 2/2 frog would have represented killing off the Kalim's follower. In this situation, the salmon being able to attack into the orb one more time puts it up to a 4/4, and then Neuron actually has to trade his frog tosser away instead of having it survive with 1 life.
Yeah, I don't think I agree with that either. I feel that you just killed the salmon, killed the threat, and then the 0-1 is easier to take care of a little later. This does also represent, like you said, the trade there. 2-4-4 is going to be able to trade off. I don't think Nero already wants that in this situation, especially if Crusader comes down and he has to commit the Frogify and he isn't able to use the Emperor's command to kind of ease the pain between the exchange of the Frog Tosser and the salmon.
I'm kind of wondering if ChiefBromden was going to go for the Deranged Monkey here as a bait for some removal coming out from Neuron, instead of playing the 8/8 Crusader, which is essentially your win condition at this stage. In this spot, because we see that Neuron has the Frogify, if ChiefBromden had been able to play something else like the Deranged Monkey, and then traded that with the Frog from Neuron, then there's actually nothing left on board. So ChiefBromden could have maybe baited some removal that way, but he's going to be able to just monk and continue the haste pressure here.
Just carry on doing what you're doing, Yellow Rush. That's generally what happens with the deck. You kill its threat, and then it's just like, just play another guy down and hit your face and see what else is going on. And usually another Zealous Crusader to follow up. But you can actually tempo out an Air Elemental here. Could go for the Monkey if he wants less value, but Air Elemental's fine. It represents 4 damage.
Yeah, the 4 damage is the big one at this point, because if the Ordra Monk gets cleared, the Air Elemental and potentially a Wind Soldier draw could be the 7 damage for lethal. Going for the Deranged Monkey in that point only would have picked up 3 buffs because the Monk had collected, so it would not have been within that range to actually finish the game.
And as we can see here, just flooding the board, just trying to get some creatures in front of the orb so the damage can be reduced. Choking Sands picked up. Could actually Choking Sands a 2-2 just to put Neuron down to 1 life, and then he's just open to any haste creature from hand. And he's going to get a Kalim's Prayer off as well, so you can generate more resources, more fairy to work with on the following turn. Do you feel like Choking Sands is worth it here for that central frog?
I think it would be. The problem with going for the Choking Sand is then you don't really set anything else up, but you do push the most damage, and that still represents both of Neuron's creatures having to trade into both of yours. Otherwise, if you don't draw potentially like a Soul Drain or something else along the line there, then you're not able to push as much damage, you're not able to get the extra card draw in, and you're not able to clear the creatures. So yeah, I really like this play by ChiefBromden, and very nicely picks up the Soul Drain as well to be able to clear one of those.
We do see the Humbling Visions come down, does clear out the Monk, trades off, passes with 1 life, and Yellow Rush is going to take advantage of that and take the win here. So Wind Soldier going to clear things out and tie it up 1-1. So while we saw a dominating performance from the blue, green, and the red matchup, Yellow Rush was able to make easy work of this deck.
Yeah, exactly. The blue green there is a deck that needs the lands to actually get the snowball rolling. We saw it. The early lake block meant that Neuron couldn't get the Battletoads down that potentially could have set up economy, set up trades, and helped him solidify the early game. So a rush deck into that matchup, really good response by ChiefBromden. Now, both of these decks that he has look maybe more rush favored because of the low Faria cost and the entirety of yellow in them. But even without that being the way that his lineup was, I think the rush is a phenomenal choice by ChiefBromden to go into a deck that needs a little bit of time.
Yep, there's no time to set up, especially against Yellow Rush. And it's going to be interesting in this matchup, depending on how the green-red is built. Now, when I stopped playing for a while, Crackthorn had picked up in popularity. The Yakapult had moved out of the meta, and it looks like it's still going to be this Crackthorn beast leading the charge for green-red.
Yeah, the Crackthorn is a really interesting one. Of course, we saw the Zephyr Wolfpine that's now in Neuron's hand get a 1 life buff. So the early 3/4 that you can get down on turn 1 or even turn 2, like we potentially see here from Neuron, is so strong in the early game in terms of what it can go up against. So defending against the rush here, Neuron should be set up relatively well with the early creatures.
Now, it offers an alternative to Sagami Warrior. It has the same stats, but has a different style of mobility. So if you're going for more land-based, if you're looking for those 6 lands for Crackthorn, I can see this Zolpine being really good. This Volpine, sorry, being very good, just being able to move around those forests. Whereas if you were playing, I don't know, a quicker green red, you might want the dash 2 to apply pressure earlier. And straight away, you can see green red just putting all these little weenie creatures down. And if he tops decks a salamander, this could be pretty deadly.
Right. A big thing as well that lines up pretty nicely in this matchup. Defending against a rush, and specifically a yellow rush, a lot of the time you're defending right around your own orb. So if you can get maybe one creature off onto a well and have it survive, give you that economy to keep up your defenses, you can actually defend really well into it. In this type of a matchup with red or red-green like we're seeing, you have the creatures that generate that Faria on their own, so that keeps you going in terms of the economy. So we saw the one Faria advantage there from the Reveler dying for Neron. If he's able to get a combat trade, now he doesn't have any buffs, so it's maybe just one combat proc from this Brigand, but that then sets up the extra Faria that Neron needs to be able to defend in this game.
Neron does have a lot of time here. He's able to get 4 lands down quite easily, no damage to the orb. And then we're going to see Crackthorn Beast have some influence a little later, just pinging off those little weenie rushers. And the one issue I think Green Red can have in this matchup, it does have a lot of tech cards that are very specific for situations. Cards like Grappling Hook, it can be a fantastic card, but sometimes it just doesn't do anything. So it's luckily there's a Crackthorn in hand, but hopefully for Neron, he does continue to draw those creatures.
Right, and the other benefit to the Crackthorn in this type of a matchup, as you said, able to ping off little things, give your guys extra buffs to be able to trade, but also having the dash in it is really important. At some point in this game, you have to get at least one creature on the offensive and actually start to put threat on your opponent, put them on a timer. Otherwise, you're just sitting, essentially waiting for them to have Last Nightmare Wind Soldier, something along those lines to end the game or reestablish pressure. Having the dash on the Crackthorn means at some point you're going to have an aggressive creature. And even in this situation, the Grappling Hook, get Cypher aggressive if Neron wanted. It looks like he's going to opt for the more defensive, though.
That was a tricky situation for Chief because no matter where he moved aggressively, the Grappling Hook lined up. And I was saying, sometimes that card can kind of be dead. In that situation, Chief kind of just threw his creature into the Grappling Hook play, but there's not much else he can do. He's a rush player. He needs to move forward.
Yeah, we do see, again, the benefit of playing the Deranged Monkey in this matchup. Cypher takes the beneficial trade there using the Grappling Hook, as you mentioned, but the Deranged Monkey's base stats are 0-1. So Cypher only gained 1 life there using his ability, where it traded into a 4 or 5 creature. So it's interesting in specifically against red, the Deranged Monkey picking up even more value, essentially.
And you can see the contrast in the last 2 games we've had. We had ChiefBromden hitting the orb on turn 2, and there not being much counterplay for Neron because he didn't have the land to be able to set up. Whereas this game, we're at 6 lands. It's Crackthorn time. It's Groundshaker time. Anything can be played from Neron's hand as long as he has the Faria. And with the green-red decks, a lot of removal is attached to their gift abilities, and it can be very tricky for a yellow rush to move around that and keep things alive. A big monkey play here, 4-5, just putting down that creature to try and get some pressure going. If we're going to throw the follow under the bus here, it's going to be eaten up by the Groundshaker or the Crackthorn. So we're going to see what the Crackthorn's up to first. It does take that aggressive dash that we were talking about, Scorch, and he does get to just clear out the 4-3 there. This is looking very bleak for ChiefBromden.
It's almost disappointing there that the extra buff went on to the Reveler, because if it had stayed a 3-4, Neron would have traded that, it actually would have died, and then you can play either another Crackthorn or Groundshaker, and it would have been an even bigger swing. But yeah, the Crackthorn lines up beautifully, takes out the creatures that are on board, and now Neron will have this 4-1 survive to attack into the demon here.
And he can take the roll, the dice here with an aggressive Crackthorn, just place it down. As long as he gets 1 ping on the... Yep, he's got 2 pings. It doesn't matter. If he had 1 ping, Groundshaker could come down defensively. Now he doesn't need to even commit that Fury. He can actually just play aggro Groundshaker. And you have like a 7-7, a 4-4, and a 5-6. This is looking lights out for ChiefBromden. I can't see a way coming.
Yeah, that is going to be enough to be lethal here. Interestingly enough, Neuron with the hover there of the Brigand, going for the Crackthorn first. As you mentioned, if one damage went onto the Salmon, you can then play the Ground Shaker to clear it. But if Neuron wanted, he could have gone for a defensive Brigand because the Crackthorn cleared, and then he would have reestablished his defenses. But here he realizes I have more than enough power at my opponent's orb. Just play the Ground Shaker there, and that's going to be the response. Neuron taking game number 3 and a 2-1 advantage.
And that first game has really set set the precedence for this match. Neuron taking that first game with the counter pick, and then Chief counter picking with the yellow rush, the green red lining up nicely against the yellow rush. And now we have the last opportunity for ChiefBromden to stay in this tournament. He has one yellow deck remaining. This could be flyers, like you said. It could be some kind of husk-based deck, but we don't see a lot of neutrals, so no storytellers are going to be in there. So I'm guessing it's going to be flyer. But now ChiefBromden just has this one game to stay in the tournament.
Yeah, and it definitely does look like a Flyers, having the emissaries in there, having the bloat flies. It is a deck that wants to generate a lot of extra Faria, just clear away everything that your opponent does, and then get extra value in the late game with bloat flies, take early advantage trades with the emissaries. A deck that can perform very well into the red-green, but it really is about the first few trades. If red-green is able to establish their creatures, they can then trade them off wherever they want. Once they get to that late game power, it's very difficult for the Flyers to catch back up if they're behind.
And this is a matchup where Grappling Hook is very useful, being able to shoot across the board and take those double collectors that are hiding on the ocean tiles. Stuff like the Windborn Champions, very mobile. They can move into positions where the Grappling Hook can get them. And I think another problem that Flyers could have is the dealing with the combat creatures. Like, if you're not running Choking Sands, giving that additional Faria to green-red can be a big problem because it just opens up more removal lines for them on their turns.
Yeah, exactly. We see these 2 underground bosses coming down, and that's a lot of Faria generated back for Neuron. If it is just straight up trades with these creatures, he's going to have the extra economy built up to just Ground Shaker afterwards, Crackthorn eventually when he gets to it, or even as you were talking about in the previous game, the Salamanders can have huge momentum swings in this game as well.
So what's the plan here? It looks like it's just going to put a lot of creatures down. Now, the one beauty of the emissaries is free Faria to kill a boss. It's actually an even trade because the boss costs 5 Faria, you gain 2 Faria back from the combat trigger, and then the emissary costs 3 Faria. So it's it's an even exchange, and that's not too bad for the flyer player. It's when the bosses start getting value, they get 2 hits off, and again generate even more Faria, and they get more life because of stuff like Runin's Guidance. So we're seeing a very slow and patient game from Chief again. It's going to be come down to like where he picks his fights, like what fights he can get the most value out, and the fights that the underground creatures don't get a lot of Faria.
Yeah, exactly. It's so easy for yellow Flyers to set something up on the far side of the board, have that flying, push their economy kind of to the far side, and then have that flyer alive, ensure that it's there for the extra buffs on the emissary, like you said, just taking value trades wherever possible. Right now, ChiefBromden, kind of a difficult position because he doesn't have anything else to play this turn. Could go for a Last Nightmare, but you really want to save those for the Ground Shakers, potentially the Crackthorns later on.
It's a tricky situation because if you do this play, go for the Manta Rider clear, you leave the 2-2 in range of that 3-5. And like I was saying, that's where an opportunity for the underground cards to generate that value, killing small creatures. So you go for the Last Nightmare there, take a 1 Faria trade-off because you have to pay that extra Faria to kill it. But it does work out. And Garadan, just one of those cards that really swings the games against these decks with small life creatures.
Yeah, you just saw Last Nightmare come out from your opponent. The Underground Boss gained some value back, the Faria from its combat ability. Garridan, a big swing of damage there. ChiefBromden very luckily has Kaleem on the board, and it survives against Garridan, has that double collection far side of the board, but it's still another big chunk of Faria that Neuron has available.
Aggressive Crackthorn here, going to buff up the Rakoa. Oh, actually kills the Kaleem as well. That is dirty. That's so dirty.
That's so unbelievably good at this stage for ChiefBromden to, or sorry, for Neron to get that clear onto Kaleem. Now, if it survives with one, you just clear it with Ground Shaker next turn, but that also means it double collected again. And ChiefBromden has had to +1 on the last couple turns, even though he's had a creature on the far side of the board. So Neron has just established this right side at this stage, pushing his advantage now that he has it. And ChiefBromden is in recovery mode, exactly as I mentioned. If the Yellow Flyers is behind, it's very difficult to come back because they specialize in being ahead and taking the trades on their terms, out collecting. And it's just not able to do that when you're behind in this type of spot.
And the matchup lines up really badly, I think, if you run the Sunsilks against green red because of the ground shakers, because of the crackthorn. Having those low life creatures opens yourself up to removal just on creatures from their gift ability. And as we've seen here, Neron's playing these creatures down, the gifts are clearing stuff off the board, but he's also applying pressure at the same time.
Yeah, you have to be very specific with when you use the Sunsilk Fairies, as you mentioned. Usually it's a spot where you need throw two of them at the board and then draw. If they flip, you then can take some beneficial trades, but otherwise they just get cleared so easily into the ground shakers, the crackthorns. I don't think there's any Cypher's Wrath coming out in Neuron's deck. It seems to be more favoring the green buffs, but even something like that can pick them off as well.
We do see an opportunity for a ground shaker to come down for the chief now. We can +1 into ground shaker, set up that defense, but it's just not going to matter. It's just make a land, send your creatures across, and push for that lethal damage. So that is going to be it. Neron taking a good game here against ChiefBromden. I felt like Neron's lineup just lined up against this kind of high tempo, aggressive lineup that the yellow decks provided in Chief for Chief. And the red deck really didn't get anything going because it did line up into that bad matchup.
Yeah, kind of like we were talking about in the early deck selection screen, Neuron looking with a much more well-rounded lineup, whereas Chief Bromden's looked like it was set up to specifically target certain decks, and maybe just didn't find the lineup that he was potentially favored into here, where Neuron just had counters to really everything. Once he lost that second game with the green blue, he was able to counter with the red green and then just roll that into victory here.
I was talking about banning the blue green so your red matchup is good, but I don't think it really mattered because of how the green red lined up against the two yellow decks. So in fact, you probably would have wanted to have banned the green red so your yellow decks had a better matchup, but then it still had to go into that green blue red matchup. If that does fall as the first game, it does put Chief behind. So it was really tricky for Chief. It was a lineup thing, I think. Chief just didn't have the lineup to match against kind of the consistency that Neuron's lineup match had.
Yeah, exactly. It definitely feels like it was more lineup favored, as we were saying here.
That is going to be the first game of round one completed. We'll be moving on to round two very soon. I don't know if Atmaz is here to give us an update.